Hi, y'all. Today, I thought we might talk a little bit about growth, which is a big topic. So this might go on for a little bit, as long as you, you have time for it. If I'm not mistaken, I think we have doubled in size this year at Buffer. And I wondered if there's a reason behind that, if this growth is strategic and something that y'all had in the plan this year, or something that just kind of happened.
Mm.
Then we even more than doubled, right?
Yeah, maybe more than double, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I think there's a few factors in my mind. I think we had this phase where like we were really experimenting with self-management and the teal ideas from the book Reinventing Organizations, which was a really exciting time for us. But I think one of the outcomes of that period of time, maybe I think it was kind of the first half of this year, was that we didn't really grow very much. I think as we started to realize start to gather some learnings from that time period, I think Leo and I especially it kind of hit us that like, wow, we've not been growing, but the product is like, the customer base is growing, and there's so much more that we want to do, so much opportunity, and maybe not moving as fast as we want to. And so that was kind of like, for us, was like a big trigger point to just decide like, okay, let's do this. And luckily we've continued to grow in terms of revenue. So we actually started to hit profitability as well. And that was also a moment for me where I was like, wow, like it's great to make a profit, but when there's so much opportunity, we should really be like reinvesting that. And so ideally we can just keep growing and make use of that to be able to provide better product and better customer service and all these things. So I think that was a big trigger point, and it's almost maybe catching up from when I think there was the big kind of thing that hit us was when from one retreat to the next, which is like a 5-month period, and we had the same amount of people on retreat. So I think things like that started to make us realize like, wow, like that doesn't feel too ideal. And now we're going to have a different situation where from one retreat to the next will be more than double the people, which will also be really interesting. But yeah, I think it's been a really good kind of turnaround things in the last few months. We're really excited and about everything now. I think a lot of things are starting to happen.
I know y'all have done a lot of work on how to hire, sort of like a blueprint for what growth might look like at Buffer. Leo, would you be up for talking about that a little bit? And maybe the idea of, do you guys see a vision for how big Buffer could be, or does it feel kind of limitless right now?
Yeah, that's really good. And I think the original blueprint, I think they came from this, I think, great sort of exercise where Joel thought through like, what structure do we need to move to in terms of the company, and what types of roles and people do we need to support that structure? And I think we just started with the idea of the product team, right? And so the structure of the product team changed a lot. We're sort of this monolithic organization where it's just like one big like lab of like people that like all work on one thing, into like actually multiple teams, right? And now we are like even like I think like 7 or 8 teams even, right? How many?
Yeah, 8. I think 8.
Yeah. And so, and then Joel came to me and said like, look, this is the system I think that works, that we're gonna be the most efficient, where people are actually not all involved in everything, but people have multiple their own things. Like, and Joel said, I think for people to work and really be able to focus, we can't have multiple, like we can't say like we split you into different roles, but you still like have a role in each of those areas. So we were like, actually each of these areas now needs to be separate, right? They need to have someone who can just focus on that and can give all their attention to one area. For example, is Buffer for Business, or the Pablo team, or the Awesome team, right? And ideally you don't have to like split your brain right between those. and so that's became sort of the basis for the blueprint. And it was really like Joel already mentioned, like a bit of a catch-up blueprint, because we moved to this new structure for the first time, which also meant we needed to come to that new. We have to like build up to that, and once we are in it, I'd expect us, like once we hit that original blueprint, I don't think we'll need to double like every few months again, but because we can work with that structure until when we might need a whole new structure. But I don't expect that to happen like every few months, but it's more like something that happens every few years. Like this has been like the first time this happened. I don't know, how do you view that? Maybe Joel, you have some more thoughts on that.
No, I think that's great. Like, yeah, the reason we need to go so fast, like Leo said, is that we're moving into this completely new structure. And so I think we stretched the old structure as far as we could. And so I guess in terms of numbers, say, for example, we hit like 10 to 15 people in the like product and engineering group. But that was like 15 people in one team. And then we suddenly realized like, wow, we need to actually split into multiple teams, because once we get beyond 10 people, get to 15 people, it's really inefficient to have one big team. People are jumping from one thing to different things. The product has grown so much. We're now like 4 or 5 years in. The product is, it has a wide like span of different parts of the product. So it's hard to like really be able to effectively work in one and then just jump to this other area. So that was kind of the idea. It's like, let's move to a new structure where we split the product into multiple parts or into different customer segments, which I think has been a bit more effective. But to do that, we realized actually it's really hard to break it down to only, ideally we probably have like 5 people per team. So with 15 people, that would be 3 teams. We realized like we can't only have 3 teams, that there's more that we have than 3 teams. So we have like 6, 7, 8 teams. And so that's where I immediately figured us like, okay, we're going to split into 6, 7, 8 teams. That means now we need to actually be like a product and engineering team of like 30 or 40 people rather than 15. So that then figured this like wave of growth. Yeah, and I guess I could speak a little to like how big we think we could grow and things. I think in terms of like vision and just the growth here, like my feeling is that I think we see like a lot of opportunity for Buffer, different spaces we could like move into, or just even with what we're doing, how much more we could do to help customers with social media publishing. And so I think we had this feeling of like, oh, we really want to just double down and grow there. And I think the other part is the culture we've established and the movements that we've ended up being part of around transparency and being a distributed team. And all these things are things that over the last couple of years, I started to really feel like, wow, that's like really one of the purposes of Buffer is to spread these movements and be part of these movements. And I think the more we can grow, the more we can put out there that like this can work really at scale as well. I think it's interesting, like I think it's easy maybe people say like, oh, a distributed team, like 10, 15 people, like yeah, maybe that can work when you're small. And then like I think just as to keep growing, people maybe keep saying that, like, oh, this a small 40-person company that can still work. And maybe even now it's still like, oh, like this is a 65-person company that can still work. But I think the more we grow, the more it really becomes clear to people like, oh, like they're making it work, and like they're not this tiny little, just a small group of people anymore. So for me, that's like part of the motivation for really going further, and just to continue helping small businesses with like getting the kind of having the voice that they deserve to have, and getting more reach through social media is something that I think we feel like there's so much more we can do there, and social media is evolving so fast, and we just want to build the tools to keep up with that. as well. So I'm not sure I see like a limit. I think like nothing just grows forever, so it's like that's not a good aim to have. But I think right now we see like huge amount of potential, and I think this new growth trajectory we're on is maybe it's very fast, and maybe we won't as they stay on like this fast of a growth pace. But I think we'll definitely be on a pretty fast growth trajectory from now onwards, I think.
It's interesting to see how, just from a marketing standpoint, the area I work in, when you bring new people on, you're like, oh, like now, like I'm not going to have as much to do. I'm going to like have to find new things to do. And it never feels that way. There's like, it increases exponentially the number of things that you can find to do. And it just opens up new areas to explore. So growth is really, really exciting in that way. You mentioned culture, and one of the really interesting things about growth is how we're trying really hard to maintain our very unique, very specific culture as we grow. And this is sort of an impossibly large question. How do you scale culture? How do you scale what's so special and unique about Buffer as we grow? I've seen, a couple of the things that we used to do, we're experimenting with not doing, like the pair calls, which we used to do every day, the mastermind sessions, which we would do with a partner every week. Things like that are sort of in flux right now. And I imagine that's just because we're growing so much and experiencing so much change. So yeah, I think the question, maybe Leo, you could speak to this one for a minute. What are the things that you've noticed changing as we grow, and how do we keep a hold of that culture?
Yeah, it's really great. I think it's a very valid question for many reasons. I think the first thing comes to mind is that we recently started to send out mini surveys at the end of the month to get a hunch of how people feel about how's it going at Buffer, how much do they like being here. And I think the rate of growth got quite a few people worried about the culture changing too much as well, which I think there were comments people saying like, I'm a little worried whether we will have the same great culture and amazing supportive environment to work in if, given the pace we're growing at. So I think that's on people's minds. Like, this is really, I think, really important to talk about, and not just talk about, but to actually do things about and like improve and make changes. To me, I think the big realization I've had is that we used to focus on culture, mostly Joel and myself, where we used to sit down every week and used to work on it, and we used to improve it. We used to check in with people. We would make changes with new values and pair calls and salary formula and all these things. Like we introduced them through we had this weekly meeting. I think it was on Fridays. We'd go to a coffee shop and we would work on culture. And in the last few months, or even like last year or so, something like that, we haven't really been doing that, right? I think I realized that, the key thing to make culture scale and work is that you give away your Legos, right? And you let sort of other people keep working on that and keep, improving on that. And at the same time, of course, we're still very heavily involved, but we only scale so far as people. We only have like so much hours in the day. And so I think a big thing that's sort of crystallizing is that we're building the people team, and we are having people that are specifically thinking about culture on a day-to-day basis. And I think right now there's Caro, there's yourself from diversity side, right? And so there's probably more people that will join that team that will start to think about, how does it feel? And I had this interesting conversation with Caro, and I said, look, as companies grow, I see many companies get better at being more and more efficient as they grow. There's many examples that I can point to in terms of companies being around. However, there's very few companies I can point to that actually maintain the same warm and, fuzzy and like good vibe sort of feeling as they grow. So having someone like yourself is going to be exponentially more important, because it's exponentially rare as companies grow that you're able to maintain that feeling and vibe when you interact with that company. And so this is sort of a long-winded answer to say we have to work on it very actively with people that think about it, that think about the flows, that think about the how people feel, that ask people how they feel, that check in with people, that make processes better, that relate just to how we feel, not just how to make things more efficient, but actually like, you know, the idea of wholeness and work environment and all those things. So that's my take on it. I don't know if Joel, you have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jill, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. And maybe we could talk about whether that change should be deliberate or whether it feels more organic. Like how much effort do we put into maintaining that culture, and how much do we say we've hired the right people and now it's up to all of us individually?
It's a great one. Yeah, I think I a lot really on the same page with a lot of what you just shared. I think for me, the one slight distinction I would make is that I think the culture is going to evolve. So I think one thing that we shouldn't maybe hold on too much onto like maintaining. I think there's parts of the culture that we're really excited about that we want to like maintain or like at least see through and find new ways to have the same great parts of the culture that we feel really good about. I think as we grow, culture will evolve. It's kind of like every new person you add evolves the culture, and that's why I think diversity is so important as well, because like, we want to have the culture evolving in a really diverse way as well. So I think that's something where like we should be happy for to evolve. But I do think that I think so. We started looking maybe like personality tests and things like that. So I think we've become really, really great in terms of our program at figuring out that people are really good fit for the culture and like have the same values and kind of life principles. I think that's really, really key. And now we're starting to realize that some things are important for us to be, you know, have the right setup of the teams as well, and in terms of like the way that people lean one way or the other in terms of personality, in terms of like details or like making things happen fast, or like, and that's something that I think Leo and I have like realized a lot over the last few years, like how well we work together because of that kind of like yin yang kind of combination. And so that's why I think a lot of it is just finding the right people with the right fit, maybe on the culture side and also on the personality side for the teams, and then a lot will just happen naturally. I think that's definitely true. I think at the same time there is this underlying kind of idea which I really agree with, which is that like you will have culture whether you like it or not, like and it's just down to whether you decide to shape it. And I think that's something we've always believed in, and that's why we, you know, put our values into words when we were only 10 people, and most companies do that when they're well beyond 100 people. And I think so, whilst we feel like it's very, very important to just find the right people and then a lot of things will fall into place, I think we also believe that like we should really be very deliberate about what kind of company we want to build and how we want it to feel.
This may be a tough one. Can you think of an example we could point to as far as an evolution that you've seen thus far in our culture and our values?
You mean like something that's changed that we no longer do and that's now evolved?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think both of you kind of mentioned the idea that culture can and should evolve as the team grows and changes, and we bring on new people with a different cultural contribution. I wonder if we've seen that happen already, or if that's something that we're thinking about for the future.
I mean, I think even the focus on diversity is one of those things where we, I think yourself and Neil really come to mind as people that I think, you know, Leo and I definitely have, you know, had a focus and like a deep appreciation and understanding that like that's very important. But I think you and Neil come on and have thought about that a lot just in your lives, and it's really, really important for you, and then you bring that in. So I think that's one key example that comes to mind for me that's really benefited the company. And now we've been talking about like how do we make sure that we have diversity fully as part of the values, and like really get it to that place where it's like a really core part of the culture.
So many exciting things coming up there. A future chat for sure. Y'all have passed around some really great resources I've taken a look at about recognizing the breaking points in management. I'm thinking of that rule of 3 and 10 in the blog post that says every time a company triples in size, I think everything looks completely different. And I wonder, does Buffer look completely different to you than where we started at the beginning of this year? Leo, you want to speak to that one maybe?
Yeah, it blows my mind how different it is. I the other day I was chatting with Joel on Slack, and I think I used the word synergy, and I was like, oh, I just used synergy. Like we're becoming a big company now. So because I said like, oh, different areas need to work better together and like need to have better synergies. And I like it was kind of funny, kind of like. What's that?
Now we're a big company.
Yeah. You have to say words like that when you get big.
Yeah, I didn't even force it. It just like sort of came out. But no, I think it's getting very different. The best way I can describe it for myself is that we're reaching a level of stability. We're reaching a level of stability that is at the early, like this early startup vibe of like constantly like knowing whether you'll die or survive, right? It's sort of moving and changing a little bit. Whereas we still want to move fast. We still want to be very, very diligent with like shipping things and making progress and making improvements for the customers. But I think the process that we're using becomes more disciplined, becomes more focused. Like the structure of the product team and the process we want to follow there, like how we create. Like I chatted a lot with Joel about like on the growth side, how do you want to run experiments, and on the marketing side, we're structuring ourselves better. Like how do we want to write blog posts, and which categories they fall into, and the same like on the happiness side. So everything becomes like this more stable environment where hopefully we can still have creativity and it still has a lot of room, or all the room for innovation it needs, but it sort of moves away a little bit from this like the early days of like just throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what happens and see what sticks, which I think partially you need a little bit in the very early days, and especially even like after. So that's, to me, in my head, the biggest change I would describe of how it feels to now be part of Buffer is like yeah.
Joel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one as well.
Yeah, I think it did feel very different. I feel like one interesting thing was just to catch up with Brian, who was like awesome product designer for 2 years, and really saw the company go from like maybe 10 people to less than 10 people to them 25, 30, and then catching up with him, and it's only been like 5 months or something, I don't know how long, but not very long, and now the team's doubled in that time, and we've changed the way that we're structured completely, and just like amazing to catch up with him and chat with him and see how he's doing now at Facebook, and learn about how they do things there, but then also to share like he was just like what's going on, what's happened now, like, and then like we're talking about all these people we're mentioning, and like he's not met like most of them, and so yeah, I think in a lot of ways things have changed completely, and I think that's something that we have to be happy to just keep changing things. I think that's one thing where it's this constant striving for that stability that Leo mentioned, for that like smooth like flow, and like how do we have the right kind of structure and systems in place to be really efficient. But then like we're growing so fast that as soon as we hit that point where we're like, wow, this is working really well now, like then we're just going to be like grown to the next point and it's all going to break again. We have to rethink it all again, and that's just going to be like how it works now. And I think it's a challenge, but it's also a real opportunity and exciting for, especially for people in the team, where I think sometimes you might feel like, oh, like how do you progress in the team? And people look for like the things in right now that they could maybe progress to, where like if you join a really big company, then you'll see like, oh, like this is how it works, this is the progression, there's like this next level of like leading like lead engineer, and then like managing, or like these different paths you can go. And we have that to some extent now as we grow bigger, but we also have this other part, which is just like maybe in a year's time we're going to be double again, and just because of the fact that we're going to be, you know, double the size again in a year's time, there's going to be so much more that like there's more different roles we need to do. It's like the structure is going to change completely again, and that's then means that there's like so much opportunity for people to grow into those new roles as well, not just the roles that they can see in the team right now that are possible things for them to kind of go into.
Mm-hmm. It seems like this is such a big thing to think about, scaling and structure and culture. Like what percentage of your brain is taken up by this stuff on a daily basis? Is it a large percentage, or do you try and keep it smaller?
Yeah, it's a great one. It's like this right now for me. It feels like quite a challenge because I think it's quite a large percentage of my brain, but then I think it's also like I was just chatting with Dave O on the design side just earlier. Had a one-on-one with him, and we were just kind of like on like, so they just had another like London meetup, and there's 15 people there this time. It's like crazy how many people. Like the third like whole team retreat was 16 people, and now we just had a London gathering like 15 people, and then Dave was saying like when he started there was only 4 people like in the UK, and it's just crazy. And Dave said like, and I'm not even like I still feel new, like I only like with for 9 months. So I think that's for me is like where it is occupying a lot of my mind, like thinking right now to try and figure out how we structure ourselves and things. But then it's also like, and I'd like to be maybe more on the higher level there to figure things out. But then at the same time, like kind of as Dave mentioned, like maybe half the whole team right now is like very kind of new to the buffer and things. So there's also a lot of like needing to be like quite hands-on and like working with everyone as well. So it's this like kind of two-sided challenge for me right now, where it is on like I'm thinking a lot about those things, but then I'm also trying to be like working like within like product and design and data and engineering things as well. So that's kind of what it is for me.
Lots going on there. Yeah. Leo, I'd love to hear from you about any particular sort of challenges you see, or maybe things that have surprised you about growing this quickly. I'm thinking in particular maybe about the retreat we have coming up that I have a slight intuition it might be a little bit different than retreats we've done in the past, just because not many of us know each other, and many of us will be meeting for the first time, and we're a larger number than we've ever been before, trying to all gather in one beautiful space in the world. So yeah, retreats or anything kind of like that. The particular challenges and opportunities of being a remote distributed team that's growing so quickly.
Yeah, Yeah, I think there's two key ones that come to mind right off the bat, and Joel and I spent a lot of time in the last few days discussing those. I think the first one is how does leadership work? How do leaders emerge? How do we know who wants to be a leader? How can we even be good at knowing that? Like, how can we be good at, helping people become leaders? I think as we grow so quickly, like, I think that's really fast becoming, I think, the number one thing we're talking a lot about. And we're like, how do we do that? Like, we oftentimes people come to us for guidance and advice, and we love it. Like, we feel like, oh yeah, like I get to share so many things with people, right? And like people ask me, and I can have such a big impact, right? And it's true. At the same time, I feel like it's not always the best use of our time, but the best use of our time is maybe when someone comes to us and asks us the question, to think, why do they need to come to me to ask that question, right? And what can change over time so that they can either have the right answer to the question themselves without asking me, or there's someone else that they can go to, so that I'm not the bottleneck that they need to go through to make great decisions. And not that only the two of us make great decisions. It's more like people want to oftentimes know what we think, or know or feel more comfortable or more confident in their decisions once they get our advice and things.
Absolutely.
So that's sort of a big thing. Like, how do we figure that out? And we talked about, like, how do we hire with our culture, especially. We had some attempts where we went pretty far with some more senior people, and where we reach out to them and it's not quite worked. So we're kind of rethinking how we want to do that. And also, how does that affect the team? How do we even coach the team right? I feel like Joel and I, we both ordered this book, High Output Management. We realized, we've not done a great job at even coaching, mentoring people to be leaders. Like, we coach them to do roles better, but not necessarily focused on, like, do you want to be a leader? Yes. Like, okay, here are the things that we think. We don't know necessarily how to do that well. So that whole leadership is one big item. The other one is, like, how do Joel and I work together? Like, that's been a big topic. Like, we feel like we had some pretty tough conversations where we're like, why are we not on the same page with some of those things that we always used to be on the same page? And one of the key realizations for me was that before we would work together on a project, and it works great. Like, we know our strengths, we know what the other person is better at. And so when we work on a project together, and that's what Buffer in the very early days is a project we worked on together, it was great. But now it's like, we don't necessarily work on it together, but we actually help people bring both of those strengths into, like, their own projects, into their own process. And that's sort of where we're, like, unsure is, like, do they both sync with both of us, or do we sync with one? But so it's sort of unclear, how do we scale our own strengths? And part of that is that both of our strengths are a big part of the DNA of the company. So, like, it's sort of this really, I feel like, really amazing, like, opportunity to say, how do we scale our approach to work, which is quite different, and still make sure that the whole company benefits from both sides. That's how I would describe it.
Those are some great ones. Yeah, really, really interesting stuff to think on. And if I know you guys, I'm sure you'll be reading up, studying, thinking, and coming up with some really interesting solutions to these challenges. I could go on about this for quite some time. It's such an interesting topic, but I don't want to take up too much time with this. Anything that either of you particularly wanted to mention that we haven't touched on?
No, I think it's been a great discussion.
It's been fun, yeah. It's been fun to lay some of those things out there. I think we've not really tied them all together in a chat like this before.
Yeah, I imagine we'll have this conversation maybe again and again as we scale and things break and we do it all over again. Should be fun.
I think it'll be completely different next time we chat about it, maybe.
Yeah, probably so. We'll make it a date. This time in 6 months, 3 months, who knows?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks so much, y'all. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.